Aloha, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our Hanauma Talk seminar series presented by the Hawaii Sea Grants Hanauma Bay Education Program. My name is Gavin Y, and I am the Outreach Program Coordinator. First off, I would like to introduce Jennifer Crawford, who is the Oahu Education Specialist and Advisory Council Coordinator with the Papahana Marine National Monument, and should talk a little bit, a brief introduction to their organization, as well as introducing our speakers for tonight. A few reminders though, before Jennifer introduces our speakers, please keep all your questions till the end of the talk, or feel free to type them in the chat, and hopefully we can get to each one, hopefully at the end. Also, please remember to turn off your microphone as well as your video function during the presentations. We appreciate it. With that, Jennifer, can you talk a little bit about your organization as well as introducing our three speakers for tonight?
Sure, mahalo nui, Gavin. And then also have Kalani joining me to introduce and start us off for the evening. But again, thank everybody for joining us. I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. And then if I can get a nod, if people can see, all right, okay. So aloha mai kako, and just mahalo for joining us for this month as we celebrate Mahina Olelo Hawaiʻi, Hawaiian Language Month. Again, this is possible through the amazing collaboration and partnerships between the Hanauma Bay Education Program, the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, Papahana Marine National Monument, and Halekua Mo'o Hawaiian Language Center at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. The talks you'll hear throughout February will highlight the importance of historical Hawaiian language literature and the innovative applications of Lolo Hawaii to Mālama natural and cultural resources of Papahana Mokuakea and Hawaiʻi. Helping with the webinar series this month, we have Kamalani Johnson, who is the Hawaiian Language Curriculum Specialist at the Halekua Mo'o Hawaiian Language Center at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Kalani Kiocho is the Native Hawaiian Program Specialist for Papahana Mokuakea Marine National Monument, along with Malia Evans, who is the Native Education and Native Hawaiian Outreach Associate, and myself, Jenny Crawford, the Education Specialist. Mahalo to all the supporters of Hawaiian language. E ola ka olelo Hawaii.
Aia o Papahana Mokuakea, I waino o ka Pakipika akau, makahi o ka ikolu ka kani Mele, mai ka aina puni o le kokokeloa. O e ka pai moku kuka awale loa ko honua nei. Ma muli o ia kuka awale loa ana, I liluewe ai na mea kanu, a me na holoholo na kukahi he nui. Ua nui na lahulu apa a kumo o Hawaii nei I loko ke kia ho o manao. A ohe ona like ma ke kahi aina. Ua nui no hoi na kahua mo o meheu kahiko, a me na moku piholo, a ho ailona aina kahiko.
Located in the central North Pacific, roughly 3,000 miles from the nearest continental landmass, Papahana Mokuakea is part of the remotest archipelago in the world. This isolation has led to the evolution of many unique plants and animals. A significant amount of species within the monument are endemic to Hawaii, found nowhere else on Earth. This area is also rich in ancient cultural sites and historic shipwrecks and landmarks.
O ke kia ho'omana o kaiau puni, Papahana Mokuakea, ke kahi o nā wahi maluo nui loa o ke au I ho'opale kana piha ia. Ma kahi o e ono hanali kaukani o nā Milekuea, ma ka moana Pakipika. Ua ane e like ka nui me ko ke kaiku ono o Mekiko.
Papahana Mokuakea Marine National Monument and World Heritage Site is one of the largest fully protected conservation areas in the world. It encompasses nearly 600,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean, an area nearly the size of the Gulf of Mexico.
Ho'okele like ia ke kiho mana o e ha hoa kahu waiwai. Ke ena oihana kalepa, ma o ka papaluna ho'okele moana a lewa puni a puni. Ka oihana kuloko o Amerika, ma o ka oihana ia, me ka holoholo na lohi o Amerika. Ka moku aina o Hawaii, ma o ka oihana o na aina a me na kumu waiwai kulohelohe. A me ke ena kuleana o Hawaii, oia no o oha.
The monument is administered jointly by 4 co-trustees: the Department of Commerce through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, and National Marine Fisheries Service Pacific Islands Regional Office, the Department of Interior through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Pacific Region National Wildlife Refuge System, and Pacific Islands Fish and Wildlife Office, the State of Hawaii through the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Aquatic Resources, and Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs.
Ho'okele like ua mau hoa kahu waiwaila I ke kia ho mana'o e ho'omalu ai na kaiaola mai na piko mauna mokupuni I na apapa kai kohala I ke kai hohonu. A me na kumu waiwai mo'o meheo e ai o ke kia ho mana'o.
These co-trustees together manage the monument to protect ecosystems ranging from terrestrial island peaks to shallow reefs to the deep sea, as well as other cultural resources within the monument. We're also happy to share that Papahana Mokuā Kea will be celebrating its 15th anniversary on June 15th, 2021, and we'll have more to share later. But we're going to get into tonight's presentation. I'll turn it over to Kalani to introduce our speakers. Mahalo nui.
Mahalo nui. No leila o keia ho'ike e kapaia o ola ka Inoa, examining the legacies of Inoa Aina for Papahana Mokuā Kea. We'll explore the contemporary research to recover and use ancestral names, and also the considerations that need to be navigated by communities to create new place names. Kekuewa, Kepoʻo, and Kama will cover these different legacies of Inoa Aina and examine the dynamic role of native language, naming processes, and its link to native experiences and meaning. Kepoʻo Keliʻipaʻakaua is a cultural resources and research specialist with Nohopapa, Hawaiʻi. He has had the honor and privilege of visiting the islands of Nihoa and Mokumanamana since 2015 and has contributed to archaeological and ethnohistorical research to protect and steward the cultural resources of Papahana Mokuā Kea, and also to find ways, meaningful ways to connect Kanaka to these Aina kupuna. Aloha e Kepoʻo. Kama Kaʻaikaula is a recent graduate of the Hawaiian Language and Hawaiian Studies Bachelor's Program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. His main research interests are oral traditions, specifically mo'olelo and ka'au Hawaii, and their ability to reestablish pilina, these relationships between Kanaka and Aina. Aloha e Kama. Kekuewa Kikiloi is an associate professor and currently serves as the director for Hawaiian Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He is also the chair for the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Cultural Working Group. His research interests include Hawaiian resource management, indigenous knowledge, traditional society, genealogies, cultural revitalization, and community empowerment. He has been my kumu, colleague in Hoa, and as my predecessor, he has laid a pa'a foundation for the Papahana Mokuā Kea Native Hawaiian Program. Aloha e Kekuewa. Mahalo nui a oko e nā hoa aina aloha, no leila makahapai ana e ka mahina olelo Hawaii, e a mai no o Kekuewa, Kepoʻo, a me Kama. Aloha mai kākou.
Aloha everyone. My name is Kekuewa Kikiloi. I'll be starting off today and we'll be talking about Ola ka Inoa, examining the legacies of Inoa Aina for Papahana Mokuā Kea. Next slide. Yeah, so Papahana Mokuā Kea is a vast region that expands for about, I think, 1,200 kilometers to the northwest of Niihau. It's some of the most remote places in our archipelago, very far away from each other in terms of distance and travel time. And over the past, I would say like 20 years or so, it's become kind of the site for one of the most important, I would say, conservation stories in Hawaii in terms of creating one of the largest marine protected areas in the world. Over the past 2 decades, this area has really been a global leader in showing the way of how remote marine waters can be protected, where previously it was mostly nearshore waters that were focused on. Likewise, as conservation efforts grew over the past 2 decades, so has the process of cultural revitalization in the area. And in a lot of ways, the two have been working hand in hand, in tandem to create a very strong sort of management framework for this area. So Papahana Mokuā Kea also known as the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands, is not just a leader in conservation, but also in the movement of cultural revitalization for indigenous peoples around the world. I will say that this place has been, a major part of my life, starting from grad school, where I went on my first trip up there after being an intern at the Bishop Museum. It was a month-long journey on the Nile Ramp 2002, in which I visited all of the islands. But it was also an important trip because there was a lot of Native Hawaiians on that trip that formed the bond. And I think it was that trip was sort of a catalyst for a lot more cultural things that were to come over the next 2 decades. Early in the early 2000s, from 2001, I was actually a student researcher at the Bishop Museum, working on a grant from Noah to sort of document and pull together all of the cultural, historical information that the museum had about the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. And it was really early on that I became fascinated about this place. I'd only heard about it really from archaeological books because my background is in anthropology and archaeology. And so I knew that there was sort of like a lost civilization on the islands of Nihoa and Necker, in the past, that people that really don't know what happened to them. And that was kind of about it. It was kind of an anomaly of Hawaiian history, if even that, because there was some speculation that it might be more Proto-Polynesian, the culture that was represented in the material items that were left there. And it was during that time at the Bishop Museum that I started to look for sort of evidence of oral traditions, because my background was in Hawaiian studies as well. I started to comb through the archives, and the first thing I realized was that I kept hitting a wall, going back into the 1800s, because there wasn't any Hawaiian place names up there. And so if I'm querying, like we would do a Google search today, right? Gardner Pinnacles or Marl Reef or Lesan or Lisiansky or Pearl and Hermes. I mean, you're going to get history that goes up to the beginning of that place name, right? But if there was an older place name that was the original island name, then it wouldn't show up, And so my first goal was to try to find the original Hawaiian island names. And it was by chance that I did that during that internship, where I found a document called the Kai'ikawaha Genealogy of Island Names. And I found other Hawaiian language mo'olelo. And again, Hawaiian language played an important role in the recovery of these names, because I was able to look at different types of documents in our mother tongue to try to find what these names were. And so next slide. So I won't go into the sort of the research findings, but I think they're going to post the link to the paper that I wrote in 2010 called Rebirth of an Archipelago. But it was sort of that early research that I was doing that pulled from Kai'ikawaha, sort of an assignment that he did for Lahaina Luna back in 1835 that enumerated all the names up there. And then there was also another mo'olelo, Kamo'olelo Mokulehua, that was published in 1862 in the Hawaiian language newspaper by someone by the initials BKH. And then Tava and Keale published a book on Ni'ihau in 1989 that had some Ni'ihau recollection of names for these islands up there. And together, cross-referencing these different sort of names, and then the experience of going up there in 2002, I started to kind of formulate sort of a mental map per se of what I thought corresponded to particular names that were mentioned in these documents. And so this is really the beginning of the research, and it's gone a long way since then. But the place names in particular, the Inoa Aina, were really the key to unlocking the door of our history up there. Because once we started to locate particular names, so for instance, you may see like Hawaii Loa Channel, or you'll see Holani Ku for Kure, or Kuaihelani for Midway. Those were places that I tried to make a best guess sort of estimation of where I thought it was. But the names itself were pretty common in our mo'olelo, and we were able to dig up different accounts, different histories that at least gave some context for how that place was viewed. And how that place was viewed was sort of these deified islands where the gods, the ancestral gods, came from and migrated to Hawaii, a place of great mana, a place where Hawaiians were going up to do sort of like ritual ceremonies and rites of passage in the past. And so that became sort of the basis of sort of what we know about this place today. So with that, I'm gonna kind of keep it short here to give the other guys some time too, but I'll hand it over to Kama, and he's gonna talk a little bit about the research process of researching place names. Mahalo.
Yeah, mahalo Kekuewa. So for this particular set of research, we focused on the name Kuai-Helani. So searching up different mo'olelo that pertain to that Inoa Aina, Kuai-Helani. But that's not to say that there weren't other Inoa Aina that were found in relation to Kuai-Helani, such as Mulivai Olena, Nu'umealani, Kane Hunamoku Uluka'a, and some others as well. Possibly future research to be done still. Next slide, please. So in order to get a nice starting point for this research, we referenced Wahine Aipohaku Tong's OHA report on Kuai-Helani that was done in 2018 to decide on some mo'olelo to be gathered. And thus far, all of the mo'olelo in this list have been gathered, or at least the ones that could be gathered. And about 50% of them have been looked through in some capacity. And looking through them, our research process includes reading, discussion of what's been seen, translation if necessary, and sometimes transcription because some of these documents are actually really hard to read. In the individual issues of each mo'olelo were gathered using Papakilo database and nupepa.org. So for anyone who doesn't know what they are, those are different websites where you can access these documents as well as other documents. But with any research comes its own challenges. So for some of the challenges we ran into were certain sections of these mo'olelo could be missing, and that could be due to them not being digitized or possibly even just not having them as of right now because of the time gap between now and when they were printed. A second challenge would be sometimes the word searching doesn't actually give you what you're looking for. And there's a lot of reasons for that to happen, but then the solve for that is to just really kind of read through each resource. And lastly, I think the important part is that it just takes a lot of time to do this kind of research because you really gotta read around the reference that you're looking at in order to really ascertain the context in which it's being used, so that when you try to interpret and analyze, you can get a more accurate idea of what's being said. So the picture in the background was given to me by Kepoʻo, but it was taken by Keola Lindsay in a trip out there in 2015. And it's a picture of stone uprights and a pai on moku mana mana. And I chose this picture because I wanted a picture to kind of represent something foundational. And to me, there's nothing more foundational than pohaku. And in my opinion, these mo'olelo are like those pohaku. So like that olelo no eo, kekahua mamua, Mahope, Kekukulu. So these pohaku or these mo'olelo have been laid out for us by our kupuna. And it's for us to start building upon as we move forward to reclaim these names and these aina. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I'm gonna be talking about some of the interesting quotes that I found. And this is nowhere near all of the quotes that I could possibly pull from, but in the interest of time, these are some of the interesting ones I think are important to bring out now. So the first comes from the beginning of He Mo'olelo Ka'au no Kuahailo Kalamai, which was printed in Kahokuo, Hawaii. And it reads, Aya he mo'oli iki e ihanau ia maka'aina kapu o Kuai-Helani. And this is kind of in the first couple issues of the mo'olelo, and it's setting up the scene because Kuai-Helani is actually referenced as being the place where Kuaha'ilo is the ali'i. And another quote, the second quote, is also from the mo'olelo of Kuaha'ilo, and it talks about, to give you a little context, a chief from Kauai comes up to Kuai-Helani and to do something there. So when he gets there, Kuaha'ilo asks him, for what reason did you come here? And this is his response. E ka hoaha nawa li kapua kua helani nei, nania wanino mai la oi, I ka manao ka ua ka I au ana mai, ke la moana kai akea. A kai polo hua hoi a kane. Ai hoi ke aku no vau ya oi, he hua kai email I ke ia la I hoi a maila. So I thought this was important to point out to kind of show you that it's kind of, it builds upon that earlier quote about high-ranking chiefs being born in Kauai Helani, and the fact that people from the islands we know today would go up there for such things as to find ali'i, which also tells us, of course, like Kekuewa was saying earlier, that there were for sure people there. Because like Kekuewa always likes to say, there's no, these Hawaiians wouldn't write this down if it didn't have a nugget of truth in it, at least. The third quote comes from Ka'au no Kapua o Helo Ai. And this quote comes in a part of the story where Kapua o Helo Ai actually lands in Kauai. And there she meets a group of people from Kauai Helani who are searching for a wahine, for their chief. And they tell her that they're gonna go look for a wahine. If they don't find a wahine, then Kapua o Helo Ai will be that wahine. And then, so the story reads, no laila, no hiola, lako, and that lako is Kapua o Helo Ai, guys. Iwai mea, a hala ke ana hulu. Ho'i maila na kanaka imi wahine, a ole na I loa aka wahine. Holo lako a hala e ha ana hulu I ka moana, o lalo aku na kanaka o Kauai Helani, ko koke kako e ike ka aina. Aia nae ho'i ala, aia nae e a honi ke ala o kekiele. Kalamai, that's supposed to be honi. That was my typo, kalamai. But I thought this was really interesting because it provides a timeline for this traveling between islands. And I think that's information like this and the various other informations that can be gleaned from these mo'olelo that will really help us to locate these Inoa Aina on the maps and put them back into use today. And also the reference of Kiele there is really interesting to me because this is the only, thus far, this is the only reference that I've seen in the mo'olelos I've read. And lastly, the last quote comes from, thus far, it's my favorite mo'olelo that I've had the chance to read for this research. It's He Mo'olelo Hawaii no La'iehau. And this is somewhat of a description of what La'iehau sees when he goes to Kauai Helani. And it says, ua puni ka aina, malama lama me ka nani o na ano like ole o na aina pa ha'o ha'o hala. I ke kai ho'oleva I ke ala I ka hiki. Nui na mo'o o na ano like ole o loko. E la'a ka ula ula, ele ele, o lena lena, ke'o ke'o, mele mele, ali ali. A o keia po'e ka mea nana e ho'omālama lama ya loko o Kauai Helani. I just thought that, to me, this is really cool. And if I was more artistic, I would try to paint this at somehow. The fact that all of these mo'o are there and all these different colors. And then on top of that, that these mo'o are the ones that are illuminating Kauai Helani. Now, I didn't go into trying to figure out exactly what that means or what that points to, but these are the kinds of information that can be found within these mo'olelo. Another thing to point out here is in this mo'olelo of La'iehau, Mo'oinanea is still in Kauai Helani when this takes place. And that would make sense why there's so many mo'o there. Other akua are also named in this mo'olelo as living or having lived there, such as Kanehuna Moku, Hina, Haumea, Namako Kaha'i, and of course Pele. So in just these small little snippets from the mo'olelo that we've looked at, we can already begin to see like there's so much ike to be found in these mo'olelo, and some of them haven't even been looked at for years. Then this is the ike that has been left to us by our kupuna, and it's pa'a and ink and pen. And if we use these foundational resources, it'll allow us to become educated as we seek to move forward today. Mahalo. With that, I'm gonna hand it over to Kepo'o, and he's gonna talk about some naming things and stuff.
Sorry, I was muted. Aloha kaku. I'm going to take a little moment to just share a quick aloha to all of you. I see so many familiar friends and faces. So many of you have done so much amazing work within the monument and for the monument. I just want to mahalo you all, not just for joining us here today, but for all the work that you do. Mahalo nui and mahalo kama. As Kama discussed, you see a lot of the different mo'olelo tied to these different places, and you see the importance of these names as they lead us to mo'olelo. These names, these Inoa, they carry so much, right? They, carry mo'olelo, they carry mana, they carry mo'oku'auhau, they carry meaning. And so being able to understand these names, define these names, or to come up with names is really important. And so we'll talk a little bit about the different ways that we interact with these places and with these names as we continue on in this presentation tonight. Okay, next slide. Commanding myself because I'm the slide guy. Okay, so as you said, names carry so many different things. Some places have different names. Different names can tell us different stories, tell us different histories, can tell us different mo'olelo about these different places. In the case of Kuaihilani, for the longest time, it's been known by the name Midway, which of course connects us more to a history tied more directly to World War II and to battles that have occurred over there. But then we have the name Kuaihilani, or the possible name Kuaihilani, as is suggested, not imposed, of course, by Kekuewa's research, his 2010 article, which I'm sure you all have access to. And as Kama pointed out, Kuaihilani is this place of so many of our akua, not just where they live. This is a place where so many of our akua were born even too. So it holds really, really great significance for us as Kanaka descended from these akua. So thankfully, there's some ways we've been able to kind of reconnect to some of these Inoa Aina. But in some cases, maybe we don't find these kind of names. And so then what do we do? What do we do when you don't know any Inoa Hawaiʻi for an Aina, for a place? Do we stick with whatever Western names you have there, like La Perouse, Necker, like Midway, like French frigate shoals? Or do we create new ones? If we create new ones, and how do we even go about that process of creating it? And who should be the ones to create these names? Especially if we're talking about these islands as a place that is so, not just special, so significant, sacred even, ancestral Aina, the physical embodiment of Po. Then who has that kuleana to name any place within that Aina? A little bit more heavy than like your friends asking you to name their kid or something, right? But yeah, so these are real questions. How do we go about that? And as you know, some names have come up throughout time over here, and we'll talk a little bit about those here. So these are just some people who have created names here in around 1978. Kumulari Kimura published in the Atlas of Hawaii a list of names that were created by the Hawaiian Lexicon Committee. And so at this time, we did not know of any Inoa Hawaii for the islands out there. I think they really saw it important to be able to have Inoa Hawaii, to be able to call these islands, right? To Kapa, Kiamawaina, Kaiaku. And again, I feel it's because of the importance we place on names and the mana that names carry. And so we want to convey that sense of mana that comes to the connection of our own culture, for us as Kamaka. And so we had these set of names that came about around 1978-ish or so. Since then, more research has been done, like that of Kekuewa, who's been able to find names he discussed earlier in that Kaʻaikaula genealogy published through Lahaina Luna. And after the establishment of the Papahana Marine National Monument, with that was created the Cultural Working Group, which has been pivotal as serving as an advisory group to the management board. And this advisory group really represents the voice of Kanaka in all aspects of management of the monument. Within that group, they have a subcommittee known as the Nomenclature Subcommittee, and they've been responsible for trying to come up with names for different landforms and for different species as well, that maybe we've lost the names for, or maybe it's just a matter of time before we are able to somehow reconnect with ancestral name cities. In the meantime, they've been tasked with trying to come up with Inoa. And you might have seen in the news recently, I believe this was in December, a couple of new species, these species like the blue nadi were given names by the nomenclature subcommittee. It was named Hinaoku or Manuo Hina. And so again, like how to go about naming them? What's the process here? Personally, I have not served on the nomenclature subcommittee, but my understanding is that a lot of them really pull from their own personal experiences with the Aina out there in Papaha, naumokua, with their own observations of these different species, these different Aina. They draw upon cultural foundations rooted in ancestral knowledge to really see like how do these, in this case, this Manu interact with the rest of the Manu, the rest of the there's Aina out there. The name sounds a little familiar to another Manu we know out there, the Naumokua, and this one was named then as kind of like that balance. You know, we always talk about Hina and Ku as balancing each other, and so that in part was one of the reasons given for naming the Manu Hina Oku or Manu Hina, with Hina also referencing the color of the bird too. And so they've been consistently naming this. And then, I kind of posed a question to us earlier and I didn't really answer it, about like who gets to create names? Who has a kuleana? That I don't have a definitive answer for you, but I can tell you that a lot of the people that I've been in discussion with, many people who have been going out to these islands, who have kuleana to these islands, feel that it is really important that for anybody to have any kind of input on this, that you should have a relationship with the place. You should be, be going out there personally, interacting with these islands who are kupuna as well. And basically have this foundation in that. Aside from the nomenclature subcommittee, there have been other kanaka who have been accessing the monument on a regular basis and have been having discussions on trying to come up with a lot of these names. So a lot of the Inoa Hawaii that we have for the land forms themselves are primarily for the island as a whole. As we know, our people, our kupuna, if we can see it, we can name it. We have names for different pool. We have different names for places where you're wa'aupai on the Aina, different ana, different valleys, coaches, spaces in between there. And so a lot of these names we don't really know right now. And so people have been in those discussion on like how to try and find names for these places, drawing off their own personal experiences and again, that foundational background. Yeah. And so granted, with all of these different names, then another question that comes up is, well, which one is the correct one to use? My answer to that question is that the question is probably the wrong one to be asking. There's value in every single one of these names. Even in the Western names here, the name Necker Island for this island that you see pictured here is named after a guy, a French dude. He's a Minister of Finance, I believe, to Jean-Louis XVI. Was his name Jacques? Yes, his name was Jacques Necker, Minister of Finance. I guess he funded the cruise at that time, which was led by Jean-Francois de la Perouse, who visited in around 1786. So that's where Necker comes from. But we know of names that existed before then, like Mokumanamana or Kamokumanamana. And this name really makes conspicuous the significance of this island as a place of great and immense spiritual power. And the other names found through the Kaʻaikaula genealogy, Ha'ena, and speak to basically implying maybe a specific type of kapu or sacredness or royal nature of these islands. So which one is the correct name to use? I would say they're all applicable. We should hold all names, and in different ways that you use, will it kind of be indicative of your own relationship that you have personally with the place. I'm blabbing a lot, so I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, other questions when we're trying to reconnect, like when we do find names, how do we know what specific place a name actually belongs to? Can we be 100% sure? Honestly, I don't think we can ever be 100% sure until we figure out time travel, go back and talk to a kupuna who lived at the time. Until that happens, our kupuna actually have left so many amazing clues for us that enable us to have a really good level of confidence in locating them. In this case, a Heiaua Nihoa, by the name of Ninioa, as you see here in this quote, this comes from a kupuna named Kepoʻo, who at the time of 1835 was living in Mana, in Kauai. Was interviewed by a student of Lahaina Luna, talking about different heiau, different places within the islands. And talked about Ninioa. Right here, as you see a heiau on Nihoa on the western side by cliff, really adjacent to the kai, and gives us a lot more information on perhaps what went into the ceremony over there. We have other ike here that shows that this heiau was guarded by a being called Kahi'upewa, or is guarded by someone named Kahi'upewa, which is a mano, and is also the younger sibling of Komohuali'i and Kuhaimoana. What you see here is a picture of that western portion of Nihoa. As you see, that's definitely a cliff. And right at the top part of it, closer, the first little rise closest to you, there is a structure there. It is the most notable structure. So it gives us really a good amount of confidence that this is probably the hill known as Nihoa. Oh, did I skip one? Okay, yeah, so that's my timer going on. Sorry, everybody, balancing. I know my notes on my laptop over here. I start looking over there, and then I see looking back at you too. So if I say looking away, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to all of you or anything. But yeah, anyways, in closing, we see that names are significant. We see that names are given at different times for different reasons. They all carry different mo'olelo. They all carry different mo'oku'auhau. And there's different ways that we connect to them, whether it be through research. For us as Indigenous research, that it extends much more than what typical academia does, but it involves really talking with kupuna, talking with kupa'aina of the place, really looking to what was left for us by our kupuna through different methods. And yet at the same time, they can never be imposed by researchers. Ultimately, it's really the lahui who decides what names they will use and how they will hold all of these names, right? If we don't know them, then we have ways that we can even create new names as a means of giving mana to this place. And we can do that when we have this really strong foundation that's grounded in the foundation of ancestral knowledge, that we as Kanaka, who are part of a living culture, we're not a static culture, can continue to build upon that foundation laid by our ancestors with our own lived experiences and our own research, and really contribute to this mo'olelo, to this mo'oku'auhau, to this succession of events and people and places and stories. And I'll stop blabbing there. I think I'm a little bit over time. I'll turn it back to Kumu Kekuewa for any other closing mana'o, and mahalo nui to all of you for joining us.
Yeah, mahalo. So in closing, I think it's just been an incredible sort of process to sort of see this sort of more from the beginning of when this all started as a student, going up there, doing research, and now seeing a next generation of Hawaiians getting involved and the research taking new directions. When I first started to research a lot of the oral traditions, I did it primarily in 2001. So if you can imagine, that's before a lot of the major sort of Hawaiian online databases were formed. So this is all done in the archives on a microfilm machine, in the dark sort of sort of damp, grungy little sort of corners of archives. And to see sort of where it's gone now and the ability for us to utilize technology in ways to pull information even quicker, to look up more things like how Kama has been doing for us with the Kuaehelani research. It's just an amazing time to be really alive, because all of these tools and all of these approaches and methods of research is empowering Indigenous communities, Native Hawaiian community to start to sort of really sort of reconnect, with these ancestrals up there. And so I think the main thing, the takeaways for some of this presentation is that when it comes to place names, it always has to be kind of seen in the context of research and community. Yeah, like for me, having good methodologies, cross-referencing, using previewing Hawaiian language resources, also assessing it against sort of personal experience of being on the landscape are all sort of methodologies to ensure some level of accuracy in our interpretations of place names and where they might be located. But it then has to be sort of weighed up against sort of the community and the living culture. And so as researchers, it's not our place to tell the community what should live on and what shouldn't. It's really up to the community and whether they want to use it or not. And so that's kind of where we've been at in terms of the cultural working group and Native Hawaiians going up there. Some people will use the English names. Some people will use what we think are the traditional Hawaiian names in their proposed locations. Some will use the new Hawaiian names. And it all points to the fact that we're a living and vibrant culture. Yeah. So mahalo, we'll leave it at that. That'll give us some time for question and answers. And I think Kalani guys also want to do a closing at the end. Do we have any questions?
We do have some questions, and I can read some of them off for you. The first one is from Andy. So in Hawaiian name genealogy before the current era, were place names changed over time? And if so, what were some of the drivers for changes?
You know, off the top of my head, I can't really think of a lot, because I think what we get is sort of the culmination of time, right? Is what we receive in the modern era, and we see what is probably the most utilized place name in the historical record or in the memory of living communities. And so I'm not sure how much place names changed over time, but one thing that might point to that is the fact that different kupuna might understand a place differently, and so there can be perhaps multiple truths for an area. You know, that different stories, different histories, different accounts, as understood by different groups of people, can mean that there can be multiple names in existence at the same time, or it could represent the changing of a name over time. Yeah. I hope that answered the question. You guys have any other thoughts, Kepoʻo or Kama?
I'm trying to think of any examples of place names that have changed. I don't know too much to aside, more like boundaries that have changed, as we see with intensification of agriculture in places like Kohala and whatnot too, where you see maybe a larger ahupua split into multiple, but maybe carrying the same name. But
yeah, I mean, examples could be like Ko'olau, right? Ko'olau Loa, Ko'olau Poko was Ko'olau before, right? So you see the changing of the name in that way.
Yeah. Most name changes that I know of are really more recent. Just like you have the one I always talk about too, when you look at the Pu'uloa area. Now that's been overshadowed, like 6 ahupua that's been overshadowed by the place in Pearl Harbor, but she came about in 1899. But as far as from ancestral changing of names, off the top of my head, I can't think of any examples, but I'm going to look into that because I'm curious too.
Mahalo, any other questions?
Yes, aloha, Jenny. I will take the Hawaiian question. So the question is, I'll read it in Hawaiian, I'll translate as well. Mahalo hau'oli. So the question is, no keia po'e noa kahiko ua imi no I paha oko I ke kahi noa like ma nā mokupuni e a'i o moana nui a kea, ma kahiki ma Samoa ma, ia ano aina hoaku. So have you researched these names throughout moana nui a kea, perhaps in Kahiki, Samoa, or other places?
I have a little bit. I did a project with the Bishop Museum at the same time as this Northwest Hawaiian Islands project on the equatorial islands. And like Baker, Jarvis, Howland, Palmyra, and so forth. It was part of a project under Noel Kahanu called Panala'au, or the Colonist Project, for a group of Kamehameha students that were sent to occupy these islands for the United States during World War II. World War II. And it was kind of this epic story of them trying to survive on these islands with support, sometimes not with support, over long periods of time, and then the war breaking out and them getting kind of stuck there because it was part of the sort of the expansion process for the United States to take control of the Pacific. There were Hawaiian names for those islands. I think Baker was called like Puakailima. Howland was called Ko. I forget what Jarvis was, but there were names for these islands, and they usually stemmed from early Native Hawaiian experiences over there, usually in the guano mining business. So the guano mining industry during that time, like the late 1800s, early 1900s, was kind of like almost like your indentured servants. Like you sign up for this and then you're like stuck in it. And so they're like shipped around almost like slaves, like digging up bird poop in all these places for fertilizer. And as Hawaiians went to these far off remote places, they developed names for the islands, and then they would write back into the new paper about sometimes their terrible experiences there, but also giving the names of these islands that they've visited. So that's one example, but I haven't seen any for Samoa in particular.
Mahalo. Jenny, would you like to field the other questions?
Yeah, mahalo kalani, mahalo Kekuewa. So the next question is from Kahanu. So how did it feel researching these new pepa? Did it feel like you were transported back in time? Were there some things you found that made you feel emotional or surprised you?
I feel like this is my question because that's my Ipo asking. But I don't know about being transported back in time, but I'm definitely a very visual person. So, and I love to read. So like I can see these things in my head. I just can't transfer them to paper very well. But I think one of my favorite parts of the mo'olelo that I've read so far, it is when in the mo'olelo of La'iehau, it talks about how it actually talks about Pele going back to Kuaehelani after she was already kicked out, which is kind of cool. But so Pele goes back and the Mako Kahai is actually on Maui and she hears about it and she gets mad. So she's like, essentially she calls out and Kuaehelani appears in front of her and she can just walk onto it. At least that's my understanding of it. I'm sure, you could read it and maybe gain a different understanding, but to have that kind of mana and what does that mean for this kinds of research? Things like that are still being looked into. So this research is definitely still ongoing. Definitely still enjoying reading these mo'olelo. Mahalo for the question. Hopefully it answered.
I kind of tack on a little bit to that too. It's just actually had a conversation with my Ipo, a little pili to this prior to it. And like personally, I'm always transported back when I read these new people, even just looking at the ads and you're like, oh, like boy, for like 5 cents a bag, like this, that's not, it's hardly cheap point now. But anyways, yeah, to be able to like read these different new people and really get an insight into the minds of our kufuna is really amazing. And a lot of times just remember that, sometimes maybe we take it for granted that, being able to learn this language. I just want to acknowledge that as, we're here in Mahina Olelo, Hawaii, how there's such great pushes to come back and really learn the language and reconnect with the language again too. But it's definitely a difficult one for those of us who are able to go to university and learn it. Encourage you all to remember what a privilege that is. And I'm reminded of that just in discussions of the Wall Hawaii initiative where UH Manoa has started holding free Olelo Hawaii classes for anybody to come. And now you got hundreds of people who are going out there. I just recently found that one of the cool page even helped to arrange for kupuna to get over there on handy vans. There have been others who've taken the bus, getting there an hour early because they're honored for this. And so it's beautiful to see this come alive. It's humbling and a privilege to be able to really understand this language and then to be able to experience these different things as we see in the new paper that the way that we do. So that's my little rambling on that. Just want to say mahalo to everybody. Mahalo to all you kumu olelo Hawaii. Mahalo to all of you who are doing what you can to learn it. Inoke mo.
And then we have one more question. So this is from Ross. Will the traditional sea routes be designated with place names too? I think this is true in Samoa. And then he goes on to say, or kayak routes?
Yeah, I mean, it was something we were aware of when we were researching, right? Because all of the other channels in the main Hawaiian Islands, at least, have names that have survived on. The only name that we could find sort of in the mo'olelo and the different archival documents has been Hawaii Loa is the name of the channel between Ihoa and Mokumanamana. Other than that, we haven't recovered anything yet, and that's the thing about this research, right? It's always, how much have we combed through the haystack to find the needle is the real question a lot of times. And I think the research that Kama has really been helping us with on Kuaehelani shows that in 2003 or 4, when I thought I had found a lot of things and put out that paper Rebirth of the Archipelago with these sort of suggestions of names, I felt pretty good at the time of where we were at in terms of research. And then, fast forward 17 years later, and then, just the effort that he put in over the past 2 years kind of blows the door open in terms of the amount of mo'olelo that wasn't looked at, right? And so I think we're in a constant state of learning, constant state of flux, and we're learning as we go along. So I think more things can pop up, and the work isn't done yet. So that's probably the best answer I can give.
Mahalo. Any last minute questions? If anybody wants to maybe take themselves off mute, you can do so. If not, we'll close this out, but I'll give it a couple of seconds.
No, mahalo for the opportunity today to talk.
Mahalo Kekuewa, Kepoʻo kama.
Mahalo for inviting us.
I wanted to, real quick, I'm gonna jump back on. I wanted to just share what's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So building on this amazing talk we've had, actually, let me do this real quick. I'll go ahead and share this webinar archive with you. So the YouTube channel you'll see here, we'll put the link in the chat box, but this is where we'll actually post all these video recordings. And you can also check out past talks that Hanauma Bay has given. Definitely good resource. And then Gavin, who opened us up this evening, this is his email, and we will also send a follow-up email to all the registrants, just with all the information. If you folks are okay with your contact information as well, we'll give them your emails if they want to follow up on the side. And then we'll also share all those links that you guys posted in today's webinar. So mahalo nui again, you folks, really, really appreciate it. So for next week's presentation, Kepoʻo actually touched upon this. So Hoku Kodi and Hoku Kahelani Pihana is going to be our presenters for next week. Their presentation is Nunului Kalani, Profound Reverberations for Hawaiian Naming Practices in Papaha naumokua kea. So Kepoʻo talked a little bit about this with the nomenclature groups, the cultural working group, and the role they play in naming the species that we discover in Papaha naumokua kea. It's going to be really exciting. We can send those links out to you folks as well. If you want to just stick around with us for the rest of the month. We have some amazing talks the next coming Thursdays, and just mahalo again for your presence with us today. And I will turn it over to Kalani to close us out.
Mahalo, Jenny. I'd like to close this off with Mele no Papaha naumokua kea. This was composed by Kainani Kahonaele and Haleloha Ayau. Malama kala nuia ka ni pukai hae hai. Makau ke kukunai haili kai o nā kai e walu. Ke makawalu ka ue ano indi o na uwalu o hanaloa hona wela no I ka moana nui. Ua kai ka makani o le hua au I ke kai. Ono ka lua o kuhai moana I ke kapa e hukai o ka ulei. O kui ka lolulua e ke aloha no ni hoa moku manu. Manu o kui ka ahui he ala ka ina ka lahui. O hina pukoa, o hina puhala koa, o hina kupu kupu, o hina I ka malamai. Ua ka o hua luu ke kola aloha ke hilmukala, kia I ka akala no hiuka. Hanau ka bea puka ka bea bea I ke kai, e ina I ka ina, ono I ka huno ka paakai. Mano ka ikeli ua ko hupu na lui. Ho I lua ho I no ka lehu, o kuuluhi ai. Hano le ka aina kupuna o nā mukule I ai. No Papaha naumokua kea la noi. E ala no Papaha naumokua kea, e ala ka ōlelo Hawaiʻi.
And with that, thank you guys all for joining us. Thank you to our speakers taking their time out. Very interesting talk. If you guys missed it or missed part of the presentation, this will all be posted as well as on our Hanauma education program, Hanauma Talks YouTube channel too as well. So with that, you guys have a great night and hope to see you all next Thursday, same time, 6:30 to 7:30 on February 11th.